I remember we shot a lot of different things that failed. You know, a lot of different versions of the extraterrestrials that ultimately didn't work out, and then there was one where I was supposed to kind of enter this anti-gravity thing and go floating up, and it didn't really work because they didn't know how to do it.
When the little alien comes out at the end, the star alien that we get to actually, or Truffaut gets to actually do the thing to, and they look and they smile, and it's a very sweet scene. They were doing it at that point with one of the young ballet students coming out in their alien costume and doing their best to make the sign and to communicate with Truffaut. But it didn't really look that convincing. I mean, one of the problems I remember was that the rubber hands were just these rubber hands with long fingers. And when it went like this, you could kind of see the rubber crinkling up at the edges, and, you know, it was kind of hard to do, and the facial expressions weren't so great. So later on, when the movie was finished, we all came back months and months later on a stage in Los Angeles at Columbia, and we redid it with a wonderful, very articulated puppet that Carlo Rambaldi built that could do millions of things and was probably a forerunner to E.T. in some way, the way he worked, the way he moved, his great facial expressions. So you could really get close and cut back and forth between Truffaut and this great little E.T. that really didn't resemble the other E.T.s at all. It was like barely related to them, but it sure worked well.
I wanted to show that because we live on a planet where there's so many different races and colors and cultures on this world, I wanted to show that on the alien world there were also different races. So there was the race of the long, willowy Giacometti aliens, and then there was the race of the short, bulbous head aliens, and there was the race of the very skinny, almost ascetic alien. And I wanted to show that, like here, there are different races there.
The name of the book that I will never write is, Stephen, have they figured out yet what I'm looking up in awe at? Because throughout the movie Stephen hadn't figured out what it was that we were looking at.
The UFOs were done almost entirely after the principal photography was finished, because we just couldn't be in two places at the same time. But the preparation for the UFOs was all being built. We were outfitting a warehouse in Marina del Rey. But it really wasn't until after principal photography was finished that we were able to get serious about being there all day, every day, and start shooting these effects. Some of the early tests, which were performed prior to my arrival on the film and sort of during my first few weeks on the film, were trying out flying saucers and motherships and out on location, actually building a physical model, lighting it up, shooting it in smoke and moving it, and trying to take a live-action approach to the effects. And one of the funniest rigs was on the mountaintop set when the flying saucers were to fly over with Rick and Melinda there right on the street. Roy Arbogast had built this huge steel rig with big arc lights on it and par lights and all kinds of bright, vivid lights on this metal rig that was hung from a cable on a crane. And the crane, which was behind the set, had to move this arm over the set. And Rick Dreyfuss and Melinda were all going to duck, you know, when it went over. The trouble was the crane operator couldn't see them because it was on the other side of the set, and the crane was reaching way over, and it was actually abandoned. So we shot those scenes with a 65mm camera. We had an off-camera arc light that would pass a pool of light past them, and they'd all look at, you know, some non-existent thing fly by. And everybody was keeping their fingers crossed because we hadn't shot one working saucer at that time. It was all for post-production. I think at the time when we started, pretty much everybody on the film who had anything to do with design or production design had certainly seen a lot of purported photographs of flying saucers. Everybody knew they were supposed to be a disc, and they were supposed to have a little bubble on the top or whatever. And there was kind of a 50s mindset about what a flying saucer would look like, and that's where we all started. And as soon as you could see that on film, you could see that it was a disappointing effect. Stephen had this idea that the UFOs were trying to kind of emulate things that they saw on Earth to make us happy or make us feel comfortable. And so one of the UFOs we built was golden arches that looked like a McDonald's sign. And it was an ellipsoidal-shaped UFO that was like one of the single arches, but when two of them flew together and sort of converged for a minute, you'd see this kind of McDonald's logo fly by. There was another logo that was kind of a trapezoid-shaped thing that when two of them lined up, it became a Chevron logo for Standard Oil. And there was a globe, a round orange 76 sign. It was never quite a 76 sign, but it was an orange spherical UFO. Those, I think, were a little over the top and were never finished and not put in the film. And I think it was only until then, and Stephen saying, you know, what if it just sort of looked like a 747 coming straight at you with its landing lights on, and you can't really see the fuselage, but you see these bright lights in your face. It's sort of like a plane landing at LAX. And we said, oh, you know, that sounds good. We'll try that. And that idea of Stephen's sort of led to the smoke room. And the smoke room was really the idea of how to create a miniature atmosphere. Because if you saw a plane flying toward you at night with big beams of light coming out of it, you have to have some way of making that beam of light show up in the atmosphere. We built this completely black velvet room that was about 60 feet long and about 30 feet across and 20 feet high, with a kind of a closed air conditioning system that would circulate air in the room. And in the air circulation system was a smoke-making machine that would inject smoke into the room. The room was completely surrounded by fans that would circulate the air completely evenly throughout the room. It turned out that the exact shape of the UFO was not very important, just some very simple conical or curved or sort of hamburger-shaped plastic object. But on that object would be mounted various shapes of very bright lights or pieces of bent neon or a combination of lights inside through holes. And if we wanted the beams of light, we'd shoot an exposure in smoke, and that would create beams of light. But if we wanted a very bright lens flare, which is a different effect of sort of a ring, a halo of light around the UFO that's occurring in the camera lens, we'd shoot that without smoke. So those would be two different exposures. And sometimes a UFO would be made up of 7 different types of exposures at different levels and different colors. But there are other objects in the film that are strange objects, like you'll see a UFO sort of tumbles over the top of the camera. It's an oxygen mask. It's just a rubber oxygen mask. We put a bunch of lights on because it was kind of a weird abstract shape. And there's a UFO that looks like a truck that flies by. So there were objects in the film that are a little more obliquely presented, and you don't interpret them literally, quite like a McDonald's sign. The first thing about the clouds is that was Stephen's idea, that clouds were a kind of a hiding place for UFOs. And it was written into the screenplay that we would expect these kind of cloud effects, and the clouds would build up out of nothing, or the mothership would emerge out of clouds, or the UFOs would emerge out of clouds. And we wanted to start experimenting with injecting some kind of white paint into water to create these clouds. And the real breakthrough came when Scott Squires thought up this great concept for the clouds, which was to have a tank half full of salt water and the top half full of fresh water, so that there'd be a difference in specific gravity between the top and the bottom half that would be invisible to the camera, but would allow you to put paint into the fresh water, which would billow out like clouds, but it would perform that kind of flat bottom atmospheric effect you get with clouds when clouds don't come below a certain altitude. And I personally manipulated all the arrival of the clouds and the spraying of this paint into the tank. So we'd get about 1 shot a day, maybe 2 shots a day sometimes. Very laborious process.
Okay, watch the skies, please.
Normally, a star field is little white dots on a black background which are photographed on an animation stand. That film would be shot up probably on colored negative and be developed, and they'd make it interpositive, and they'd go through different steps, and that would go to the optical department. And those big white dots, they just look like big white dots. They don't look like stars because they're duped and they start getting bigger. They start looking like basketballs. It's very tricky to do a realistic sky background. So the technique that we used for Close Encounters, which I don't know if it's ever been done before or since, was to make a standard kind of star background, little white dots on a shiny black paper. This is so that there's the maximum amount of contrast. And the star backgrounds were not photographed and then optically duped. It was all the original animation.
And so we would composite a shot in the optical printer of all the different elements of the foreground, the background, expose the matte painting on, expose the UFOs on, and then take that piece of negative before it was developed and put it on the animation stand and put the stars on as an original, unduplicated exposure, sometimes with traveling mats, because foreground people had to move in front of the stars. But this allowed very high-quality stars that went right to the final composite negative of the film, which made the stars look much crisper, brighter.
far as building the miniature Devil's Tower, Douglas Trumbull gave me some photographs of the actual one, and if anybody has seen the real Devil's Tower, they'll know it's a lot taller than it is wider. So he wanted the actual shooting model to be more into the film format, so it's actually squished down a little bit. So what I took was an afternoon and just drew basically a blueprint of what the mountain would look like in the format he wanted, and he approved that, and we get a big block of what we commonly call green death. It's like florist foam, and I spent like 2 days carving that, and once it was approved by everybody, we made a quick mold and did a couple of plaster casts. This is a casting off the mold, so it's actually the size that was used in the film, so you got an idea how big the actual setup was with the Devil's Tower miniature and a 4-foot, 5-foot foreground miniature of a landscape.